Shalom Talmidim. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the second verse of Jonah. A number of you on your translations, as I was working through them, came up with different ways of translating a particular phrase that's repeated a number of times throughout the whole of Jonah 1, but particularly throughout this opening section. In a few ways in the opening several verses. And I just wanted to touch on it a little bit with you and reflect theologically on what's going on behind the scenes that's being expressed through the grammar, through the word choice of the Hebrew storyteller. And that word is the preposition לפני. In verse 2, there's a first common singular suffix. God is speaking to Jonah that he says, Kum lech el Nineveh ha'ir hagdola ukra aleha. So get up, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out or proclaim against her or over it. Ki alta ra'atam lefanai. For indeed, or because, their evil has risen up, lefanai. And then what do we make of this final word, lefanai? Well, the word it's a preposition, but it's composed of taking a couple of words and putting them together. So you have le, the preposition lamed, to or for or according to, and then you have pene, which is the construct form of the word face. So you put those two together and you get lifnei, to the face of. To the face of. And so it is translated a number of ways: in the presence of, to the face of, before, right? So we talked about this at the intensive and illustrated that. But I want to talk about what's going on that makes this word so critical. Because one of the things that this word assumes is the presence of God. So whether it's face or presence or before, either one of those, but to the face of or in the presence of, more so than before, really imply the presence of God, God's face, and so that's one part of it. Another thing, another aspect of this is that Nineveh's evil rises up before God's face. So this whole phrase is describing God is expressing the means whereby he has become aware of the deeds of the Ninevites, which he labels as evil. And so if lifnei has to do with presence, and if God's awareness is generated by sight, he sees these evil deeds that come before his face, what does that suggest about God's presence? Where is God located? But more than that, I'll actually discuss that in a video next week more explicitly. But there's another part of this that has to do with the fact that evil rises to God's face. What does that mean? And what is being what's assumed that then gets expressed according to that way of phrasing it. And so in order to answer that, we need to think about Hebrew cosmology. And cosmology is a word that describes beliefs about the structure of reality, the structure of the cosmos. So cosmology is the Greek of cosmos and logos, a word about the cosmos, a word about the universe, or reality, the place in which we live. How do we believe that that's structured or framed? And the Hebrews had a particular cosmology, a number of them actually, with multifaceted, like a diamond or a prism, multifaceted cosmology. And one of those facets, if you turn that prism or turn that diamond and look at it from a particular perspective, one of those facets is at play in this phrase: their evil has come up before my face. And so this is kind of the cosmology. So the people of Israel believed that their deeds, their actions, their decisions, the economic structures, their business practices, their relationships, their kinship groups, the way that they related to all of these networks, all of the relationships in their lives, and all of the not just relationships with people, of course, but relationships with the earth through farming and agriculture and animal husbandry and all of that, that their deeds had sort of concrete effects on the world. And all of their deeds, both good and evil, would rise up to God's presence. And God would behold the deeds of the people of the world, and then would decide if God would hold or carry or bear, you might think of on God's shoulders, bear the weight of those deeds, or whatever rises must come down. Either God bears the weight of those deeds, or God lets those deeds fall back down upon the heads of those who did the deed, or perhaps on successive generations of those people, or upon their community, or their kinship group, or their family, or whatever the situation might be. And so you get this idea of deeds going up and then deeds coming down. But the key idea here, or the key belief here, is that God chooses whether or not to bear the weight of those deeds. And the verb nasa, nun, sin, aleph, is the verb to carry, to bear, to lift, to raise. Not in terms of rising oneself, but to raise something, either raise a banner, or raise one's eyes, or raise an object of some sort. Later on in Jonah 1, the sailors will raise Jonah, lift Jonah up, and then throw him into the sea. But that verb is also one of the most common verbs translated as forgive. And so the cosmological understanding of forgiveness is the idea of evil deeds rising up, and God then carrying them as a weight on God's shoulders. And so you get every once in a while in the prophets God lamenting or almost gasping, saying the burden of the people's sin is too much, too heavy to bear. Now this is provocative, prophetic, and poetic speech of God through the prophets to the people. But there again, that's the same understanding of both deeds and God's relationship to those deeds that's at work in those prophetic passages. So this is very much what's going on in Jonah here in verse 2, that God is in the midst of deciding whether or not to bear the burden of Nineveh's sins. And we know what happens in the end of the book, at least, that God chooses to bear those sins, and that God's decision to bear those sins is a scandal that Jonah cannot comprehend and is unwilling to accept, which is a mirror that Israel's storytellers are holding up to Israel, saying, this is who you are. Um, do you hold so tightly to your covenantal priority or privilege that you're forgetting the fact that the covenant was intended to create out of you a community that could offer the love of God to the world? But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So there are some thoughts for you on Hebrew cosmology at play here in the use of lifnei, lifanai, and also then later mi lifnei, away from the face or away from the presence.